So, this video is going to be responding to a different priest, since I'm kind of done with Trent Horn. If I see another video from him, I'll do it. But he wasn't presenting any arguments, he was just saying how to address the problem. So this time, I'm going to tackle a different priest who says responding to James Martin. So I'm going to see if he presents any valid arguments.
Nuance doesn't go viral.
Right.
We don't like nuance.
Right.
We like sledgehammers.
It's problematic or in error. Okay. So, for example, for someone to say God made someone a certain way, that is error.
Yes.
So that's not.
Let me.
Yeah.
I'm going to read something to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a direct quote from Father James Martin, and I bring this up because you wrote a book called "I Believe in."
Made for Love.
Sorry, Made for Love.
Yeah.
What's the subtitle?
Catholic Church and same-sex attraction.
Okay, so it has to do with homosexuality. So for that reason, I want you to comment on this. So this is a direct quote from him. All these Bible passages people throw at you, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, and even the stuff in the New Testament where Paul talks about it once or twice, has to be understood in their historical context. The Bible is written in a particular time. It's the inspired word of God, but it is written certainly in a particular time and in a particular historical context. Certainly in Old Testament times, they didn't understand the phenomena of homosexuality and bisexuality, I would say, as we do today. I'd also like to say that there's a lot of other stuff in Leviticus that we sort of understand in its historical context. Like what kind of slaves can we have, whether or not we can wear certain kinds of clothes, whether or not our crops can be next to one another. We don't look at those passages in an ahistorical way, so why should we look at passages of homosexuality that way? I'd also like to say that in his 3-year public ministry, Jesus says nothing about the topic. All right, so there you go. Criticize that for me.
Yeah. Well, it's such an interesting. There's a way of speaking.
You can decline to criticize this. I don't need to be a dick and push you into a corner
no,
here.
It's okay. There's a way of speaking that. So when I was in college, all my professors talked like that, where it was kind of this sense of I'm going to begin by opening up what we know to be true, in the sense of it's important to read the Bible in its historical context. Yep. Okay, absolutely. And then opening it up further to saying, therefore it means whatever I want it to mean. Or, yeah, that's essentially that. Or it doesn't mean what I don't want it to mean. And
that's the nature of interpretation. The same thing could be said in reverse. So this priest is, I assume, going to say James Martin is picking and choosing what he wants to believe from the Bible. But you could say the same thing about this priest. He doesn't like slavery, so slavery is historical, even though it was justified by certainly Protestant Christians, and plenty of terrible stuff has been done by Catholic Christians. And so the whole interpretation depends on the zeitgeist. And so because homosexuality, though it's greatly more accepted nowadays, is still somewhat controversial, you're going to say, well, that's still valid to say homosexuals are bad. I mean, that's not what he's going to say, but that's what he's saying, essentially.
That's not a one-to-one kind of a situation. For example, like the fabrics thing. You can't mix fabrics in the book of Leviticus. Therefore, you also, now you can. Therefore, it's just the same thing. It's all the same. Versus actually the historical context, which would be when it came to those kind of declarations in Leviticus regarding, your hair not being, and your temples not being cut, or not mixing certain fabrics, or not eating shellfish, these kind of things. Those were all in the sections of Leviticus that had to deal with how the community itself lived. When it came to the teachings on homosexuality, it had to deal with all peoples. It's so interesting, fascinating. Sure. When you actually get to the context, it's like, let's actually take a deep dive. Yeah. You said you need to be historically contextualized.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Yeah. In that sense, what you have is some rules that were specific to the Jewish people at the time in the covenant. These other declarations have to do with all peoples, even those people amongst whom the Jews are living.
So here's the thing. James also mentioned slavery. So that's the natural question to ask. God said homosexuality is bad in all societies, but not slavery? Really weird. Okay. Your God's illogical then. To which you could say God works in mysterious ways, and we don't know why he's saying homosexuality is immoral, and we don't know why he says certain other things are moral. So then what I'm confused about, or why he says anything at all and not says other things, the problem with that response, God is mysterious, any religion can use it. If the Quran doesn't make sense, a Muslim can say, well, God works in mysterious ways. If some other theistic religion or any religion says something doesn't make sense, if paganism doesn't make sense, imagine there were still pagans living today, you say the Iliad doesn't make sense, well, the gods work in mysterious ways. It's such a bad argument. Why don't you just admit that your faith, at least how you present it, is illogical?
Didn't understand the cultural context, didn't understand this like we do. Again, let's look at the cultural context. There has always been homosexuality or homosexual acts, especially in those ancient cultures. It was by and large accepted and not seen as any big deal in Greco-Roman culture.
Socrates, the writings of Plato, you see it. Yeah.
Right, and so you say, okay, so they lived in an even more kind of open/tolerant culture than we might have been up until the last decade. So your critique falls flat there as well. Now extrapolate that to, again, that sense of, but in the context of a loving monogamous situation, everything changes. And that doesn't hold water either, because Romans 1 doesn't talk in any way, shape, or form about whether two men are laying with each other, two women laying with each other in a monogamous loving relationship.
Yeah.
It has to do with what is the nature of sex, what's it oriented towards, and what is the opposite of that. I don't know, it's just misuse of that.
And then finally, there's the argument from silence. In other words, a document
exactly.
can be said to be important based on word count.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jesus didn't say anything. Capital punishment was alive and well in Jesus' day.
Yep.
He doesn't say anything about capital punishment needs to be eradicated. Slavery was present. Jesus didn't say anything about slavery being eradicated. So does that mean that
recycling, abortion, contraception?
Does that mean he's endorsing those things? Because he didn't speak directly against them. And
not necessarily. Yeah.
And a lot of times when someone doesn't speak against something in the scriptures, it's because it's like, well, we all know that's not the case.
Yes.
It's like that's not even
it's not a point of contention.
Yeah, we all agree. If we live in the covenant, then here's what we know sex is for. We know what the marriage or relationships are oriented towards. So we don't have to fight.
Well, that's an excellent answer.
No, it wasn't. So he mentions slavery. He mentions capital punishment. Capital punishment we still have and is still debated today. Slavery existed everywhere, wasn't abolished till very recently, and still exists in some forms around the world and in our own country. If slavery, so I'm trying to wrap my head around, slavery's okay, obviously wrong, that's what he meant. If so, then why did we have it for so long? If it wasn't obviously wrong, don't you think that should have been something God mentioned, just like he did about homosexuality, and maybe explained why these things were immoral? To which the Christian will say God works in mysterious ways, which any religion can say, and I just wish Christians like this guy here would just admit he's dumb. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He just believes it because he was taught it. But, they're never going to say that. They're going to pretend like Christianity's logical, and when it comes to the illogical parts, they're no better than any born-again Christian. That's what's funny about the Catholic Church. Like, Catholics, they accept the Big Bang Theory. They accept evolution. So you might get the impression that they're more logical than Protestants, but then when you get to these issues, you realize, no, they're not.